In late 1944, Japan's military turned to a deadly and radical tactic: suicide attacks by pilots known as kamikaze, or divine wind. These young men, often in their late teens, flew explosive-laden aircraft into Allied ships, sacrificing themselves to delay defeat. The kamikaze program, rooted in Japan's cultural and strategic desperation, is a fascinating study in psychological conditioning. The kamikaze were products of a system that suppressed survival instincts to achieve tactical objectives. From the Battle of Leyte Gulf to the airfields of Kyushu, the kamikaze program offers a case study of the intersection between military strategy and human sacrifice. By mid-1944, Japan faced a collapsing war effort. Allied advances in the Pacific, coupled with resource shortages, left the Imperial Navy and Army outmatched. Conventional tactics faltered, prompting Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi to formalize suicide attacks during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. Named Kamikaze, after a 13th century typhoon that repelled invaders, these missions aimed to disrupt Allied fleets using minimal resources. The strategy emerged from necessity. Japan lacked trained pilots and modern aircraft, relying on older models like the Mitsubishi A6M20s and Nakajima Ki-43s, often stripped for one-way flights. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, Japan deployed approximately 200 to 300 kamikaze sorties in the early stages, reaching 1,200 by the end of the Leyte operation, marking the debut of organized suicide attacks. These missions, coordinated by Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi's 1st Air Fleet, primarily involved older Mitsubishi A6M0s and Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, often fitted with 250-kilogram bombs for maximum impact. During and after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, kamikaze pilots sank at least one major warship, the escort carrier USS St. Lo, and went on to destroy 15 to 20 ships and damage more than 80 during the broader Philippine campaign. Despite these losses, the Allied fleet, numbering over 700 ships, maintained operational superiority, exposing the limitation of the kamikaze's tactics. The kamikaze sorties resulted in around 1,200 pilot deaths, many involving minimally trained aviators aged just 17 to 20. This staggering human toll, coupled with the operation's failure to alter the battle's outcome, underscored the desperation driving Japan's strategy, as the Imperial Navy sacrificed irreplaceable personnel for fleeting disruptions. Japan's military engineered the kamikaze mindset by targeting impressionable recruits aged 17 to 20, leveraging cultural frameworks like the Bushido code, which framed death for the emperor as noble, and Shinto beliefs, which presented sacrifice as purification. These pilots, many with fewer than 100 flight hours, were not elite aviators but malleable subjects. Training camps enforced groupthink, isolating recruits in environments where dissent was unthinkable. Peers and instructors reinforced a singular narrative: death in service was the ultimate honor. This collective ideology dulled individual doubts, aligning pilots with the group's fatalistic resolve. Cultural pressures amplified this. In Japan's collectivist society, shame was a powerful motivator. Refusing a mission could disgrace one's family or community, a stigma heavier than death for many. The military exploited this, framing kamikaze duty as a personal obligation to the emperor, revered as divine. To suppress self-preservation instincts, trainers desensitized pilots to mortality. Death was recast as a transition to eternal honor, and their aircraft as tools of transcendence. Cognitive dissonance was managed by focusing on the ideals of nation, legacy, and family. Training included repetitive drills, patriotic songs, and lectures on Bushido, embedding sacrifice as a reflex. However, final letters, preserved in archives, reveal private struggles. For example, as one pilot wrote, "I am ready, but I think of my sister's smile." Such admissions highlight the tension between duty and humanity. By the war's end, over 3,900 kamikaze pilots had died. Their brief training, sometimes as little as 30 hours, geared less toward aviation skill than mental resolve. Their conditioning transformed novices into pilots willing to fly their Zeros or Yokosuka MXY-7 into oblivion, their minds as critical to the mission as their aircraft. Kamikaze training was a blend of aviation basics and ideological reinforcement. Camps like Chiran and Bansei in Kyushu housed recruits in austere conditions, minimizing distractions. Pilots trained on outdated aircraft, Zeros, Ki-43s, or Kawasaki Ki-61s, learning just enough to take off, navigate, and dive. Flight hours were limited, often under 50, as survival was irrelevant. The real emphasis was mental preparation. Instructors delivered daily lectures on duty, while rituals solidified commitment. Pilots wrote final letters, drank sake in farewell ceremonies, and tied hachimaki headbands, symbols of resolve. Letters, an important ritual, affirmed loyalty. As in Second Lieutenant Tetsuo Tanefuji's, "I serve the Emperor, yet I wish to see my village again." Songs like Umi Yukaba, pledging death for the nation, were sung nightly, embedding sacrifice in routine. Farewell photos, staged before missions, captured pilots in stoic poses, their images sent to newspapers or families. Constant drills, oaths, and isolation left little room for reflection. By their final days, many pilots internalized their mission, viewing their aircraft as extensions of their duty. The Battle of Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific, saw the most extensive kamikaze campaign of the war, with approximately 1,900 sorties across 10 major waves, Operation Kikusui 1-10. These attacks targeted the Allied invasion fleet, supporting the April 1, 1945 landings, aiming to disrupt supply lines and troop deployments. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces deployed a mix of aircraft, including older Mitsubishi A6M0s, Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, Kawasaki Ki-61 Haiyan, and specialized Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka rocket-powered bombs. Many planes carried 250 to 500 kilogram bombs, launched from Kyushu and Formosa bases. Sorties were organized in mass waves, often escorted by conventional fighters to overwhelm Allied defenses. Pilots, typically young recruits with 30 to 50 flight hours, relied on basic navigation to locate targets, diving at ships under heavy anti-aircraft fire. Allied countermeasures, including radar picket destroyers and combat air patrols with Grumman F-6F Hellcats, intercepted many attackers, but the sheer volume strained defenses. Although reports vary, it is estimated that kamikaze attacks were instrumental in sinking somewhere between 26 to 30 Allied ships, including 12 destroyers, and damaged 368 others, with significant hits on carriers like USS Enterprise and USS Intrepid. The human toll was high, approximately 4,900 Allied sailors killed, 4,800 wounded, and 1,900 Japanese pilots killed. Tactically, the attacks disrupted operations, damaged carriers withdrew for repairs, and picket destroyers suffered heavily. For example, USS Laffey endured 6 kamikaze hits. However, the strategic impact was negligible. The Allies secured Okinawa by June 22, 1945, establishing a staging ground for invading Japan. The kamikaze failed to halt the invasion, as Allied numerical superiority, over 1,300 ships, and robust combat air patrols mitigated losses. Okinawa's kamikaze campaign showcased the desperation of Japan's leadership, expending thousands of aircraft and pilots for limited gains, and highlighted the Allies' resilience against unconventional threats. The first of 10 Kikusui, or floating chrysanthemum operations during Okinawa, Kikusui-1 was a coordinated kamikaze assault involving 355 suicide sorties and 340 conventional aircraft, targeting the Allied fleet off Okinawa's coast. Launched on April 6 and 7, 1945, it aimed to cripple Task Force 58's carriers and supporting ships. The Japanese deployed Zeros, Ki-43s, Aichi D-3 Avals and Nakajima B-5N Kates from Kyushu airfields, with some Oka bombs delivered by Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers. Sorties were timed to exploit overcast weather, reducing Allied combat air patrol effectiveness. Pilots targeted high-value ships, carriers and battleships, diving at speeds up to 300 miles per hour to evade anti-aircraft fire. Allied defenses included radar-directed 5-inch guns and proximity-fused shells, which downed many attackers. Radar picket destroyers, positioned 50 miles from the main fleet, bore the brunt, drawing attacks to protect carriers. The operation's scale forced Allies to scramble combat air patrols, with Vought F-4U Corsairs and Hellcats intercepting 60% of incoming planes. Operation Kikusui 1 sank the destroyer USS Bush, Colhoun, and the minesweeper Emmons, while damaging over 20 others, including battleship USS Maryland and light damage to the carrier USS Essex. Allied losses included 650 sailors killed or wounded. Japan lost 355 pilots and 200 conventional aircraft, a 70% attrition rate. Tactically, the attack strained Allied resources. Picket destroyers required reinforcement, and damaged ships withdrew, temporarily reducing air cover. Strategically, it failed to disrupt the Okinawa landings, as Task Force 58 maintained air superiority. Kikusui 1 was remarkable for its coordinated scale and the introduction of Oka bombs, which, despite their 1,200 kilogram warheads, had limited success due to the vulnerability of G4M carriers. It exposed the kamikaze's tactical niche, disrupting but not defeating a superior navy. On May 11, 1945, during the Okinawa campaign, 2 kamikaze pilots struck the USS Bunker Hill, a fleet carrier in Task Force 58, in one of the most devastating single-ship kamikaze attacks. The attack crippled a key Allied asset, highlighting the kamikaze's potential against high-value targets. The attackers, piloting Zeros armed with 250 kilogram bombs, approached from Okinawa's north under low cloud cover, evading radar until 30 miles out. At 10:04 a.m., they dived from 6,000 feet, exploiting a gap in the Bunker Hill's combat air patrol, partially depleted due to refueling. The first Zero, piloted by Lieutenant Seizo Yasunori, crashed into the flight deck, igniting parked aircraft and fuel. Seconds later, Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa's Zero struck near the island, detonating among damage control crews. The carrier's 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons fired, but failed to stop the low, fast approaches. The attack lasted under 30 seconds, showcasing the kamikaze's ability to exploit brief defensive lapses. The strikes killed 396 sailors, wounded 264, and set the Bunker Hill ablaze for hours, destroying 34 aircraft and disabling flight operations. The carrier, carrying 2,600 crew, survived but required 6 months of repairs, removing it from the war. Japan lost 2 pilots and planes, a minimal cost for the damage inflicted. Tactically, the attack disrupted Task Force 58's air support, forcing other carriers to compensate. Strategically, it had no broader impact. Okinawa's capture proceeded, and the Allies' carrier strength of 8 fleet carriers and 8 or 9 light carriers in Task Force 58 absorbed the loss. The attack's precision underscored the kamikaze's threat to capital ships, though its rarity limited systemic impact. The Bunker Hill attack was remarkable for its catastrophic effect on a single carrier, demonstrating the kamikaze's potential when pilots exploited weather and timing. Kamikaze missions were chaotic and costly. The kamikaze program consumed 3,900 pilots for marginal gains, accelerating Japan's defeat. A typical mission involved a Zero or Oka, armed with a single bomb, escorted by fighters until the final dive. Pilots faced intense pressure, with no radio contact and little chance of success. Ultimately, the kamikaze's strategic impact was limited. Post-war, Japan re-evaluated the kamikaze. Once heroic, they became symbols of futile sacrifice. The Chiran Peace Museum preserves their letters, framing pilots as victims of militarism. Modern Japan views them with unease, a reminder of nationalism's toll. Their legacy endures as a study in the human cost of war, where psychology and strategy converged in a fleeting, tragic campaign. The kamikaze mindset emerged from Japan's cultural, psychological, and strategic crucible. Rigorous conditioning, rooted in Bushido, transformed young pilots into instruments of sacrifice, their outdated aircraft extensions of a desperate ideology. Their story, preserved in archives and wreckage, remains a stark lesson in sacrifice and resolve.